So today our topic is the Mahavakya, part 4. Now we already discussed 3 important Mahavakyas, and while introducing these 4 great statements in Vedic literature, I made it clear in earlier sessions that these 4 great statements correspond to 4 levels of human spiritual evolution. They are in the form of instructions from a teacher to a disciple. The first one is technically called the statement of instruction, is called Upadesha Vakyam. Upadesha means instruction, advice, direction, and so on. That is Tattwamasi. This is the most prominent and most celebrated of the 4 great statements. We already discussed this. It means you are dead. The statement may not make much sense if you just read the literal translation. But there have been many huge volumes, texts written expounding the real meaning and implication of the statement. In short, I can say, I am repeating what I stated many times earlier, that the truth, the reality, or God, whom you are searching everywhere, outside of you, is in fact within you. It is the real you, but not the human dimension of a personality, but something that goes beyond the physical, the psychological, intellectual, the inner spiritual spark that is present in all of us. Now, in connection to this, there is a statement in the Rigveda Samhita. You find this very often. It is called Srishti Suktam, the hymn of creation. It's a very metaphysical, very celebrated verse. But there is one statement there. Sato bandhum asadi niravindan kriti pratishya kavayo manisha. This is a statement in the Sukta. So Sataha bandhu means, Sat means existence, bandhu means cause here. The final cause, the original cause, the reality whom you call God is within us. This is the implication. So, in ancient times, the Vedic sages went in search of this absolute reality. And finally, not finding this absolute reality in the external world, they turned the inquiry inward, and when they turned the inquiry inward, they found that the truth that they were searching for was within themselves. And then they realized this truth with their purified intellect. As we do spiritual practices, meditation, prayer, reading holy scriptures, practicing unselfish service, all these qualities, great human virtues, when we practice, our mind becomes pure, and then this reality manifests itself within our hearts. So this is the meaning of this particular quotation from Rigveda. Now, coming to the present, the 4th of the important Mahavakyas called Aham Brahma Asmi. Means I am Brahman. Remember, if you read the literal translation, you'll be terribly misled. And if you want examples, you read the works of Schweitzer, Mackenzie, and many early translators of the Upanishads. And you can find the most misleading, terribly misleading, or almost atrocious, cruel interpretations of these great statements. I am Brahman, they translate, I am Brahman, I am God. So you are 6 feet, 250 pounds, who have got diabetes, heart pressure, all kinds of problems, who drive a car, who eat food, who feel hunger and thirst, and you call yourself God. There cannot be any greater blasphemy. So many translators who translated these verses, without really learning from great teachers sitting at their feet, have made these atrocious translations. In fact, that is one of the purpose, to clear out, to try to make a humble attempt to clear this dark cloud of misunderstanding. That's one of the purposes of my taking up this subject, is somewhat obtuse, technical, for a topic for Sunday lecture. On the other hand, there is another side. If you read the works of Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, American transcendentalists, especially Emerson, who wrote a number of essays in the early journals, in the Concord movement, and if you read the works of Schopenhauer, Paul Deussen, Max Muller, MacDonald, and then Keith, Rose, many European Indologists, they found these very statements as the highest peak of human spiritual achievement, human spiritual evolution. That's why if you read Max Muller, if you read Paul Deussen, you read and you can read what they said about the Upanishads. After reading the Upanishads, they got a new insight, a spiritual insight into their own respective inherited religious traditions. They gave them new light, even in understanding the religious tradition to which they were born, which they understood in a much deeper and more profound sense after reading the Upanishads. So that is the glory of these statements. But again, so I shall come to the Mahavakya proper right now. So, Aham Brahma Asmi, these are 3 words. It comes in the, for those of you who are interested, it comes in the Shukla Yajurveda tradition, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which you can read. You can get the text. Preferably if you read Shankara's commentary, you will get the better meaning. So, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, chapter 1, section 4, it may be the section may be called Brahmana, and mantra 10. This is the context. Now, the full mantra is almost in the form of a long paragraph. The essence is this: Brahma va idam agra asit, tat atmanam eva aved, aham Brahma asmi iti, tat yo devanam pratyabudhyata sa eva tat abhavad. It's a very short statement. Oh, of course, the paragraph continues, but the most important part of this paragraph is this statement, Aham Brahma Asmi. Now, I am Brahman, this is the literal translation. Aham means I. Aham has got another meaning, the eternal, the imperishable. That's the Sanskrit grammarians give a different meaning. Now, Sanskrit grammarians had developed 3 types of interpreting meanings of words. Maybe that could be considered to be the beginning of modern hermeneutics in language. in the early stages of the evolution of the science of interpreting scriptures, these views are considered to be the genesis of modern hermeneutics, applied to philosophy, theology, and so language. So a word can have one meaning. That's called literal meaning. It's called vachyartham, mukhyartham. It's called vachyartham. Means what the word really literally means. To give an example, if you go to any Oxford dictionary or Webster's or Chambers, any dictionary, in most cases, the first meaning will be the literal meaning. I mean, what strikes our mind when we just read that word. What the word actually, what is the impact of reading or listening to that word in our mind when we interact with that word. So it is called abhidha, means the name abhidha. The second meaning may be indirect meaning. It's called vyangyartham. It may be an indirect kind of implying something different from what it literally means. The third way of interpreting the meaning of a word is lakshana, it is called, where you find the literal meaning actually is almost ridiculous, meaningless. But at the same time, the real implication of that word cannot be totally different from the literal meaning. But literal meaning itself makes no sense. So what do? You understand literal meaning and use your intelligence or certain tools of language analysis, and you find the real meaning of the word with the help of the related philosophical context in which that particular word is used. It is called lakshana vritti or lakshana. Because hermeneutics has got different other funny aspects. So if somebody gets a name Sukumara, Sukumara means most beautiful. But he may be the ugliest person in the world. But his own grandmother may call him Sukumara, which means very beautiful. So the literal meaning is totally the opposite of the real fact. Like that, there are many different kinds of interpretations. You know why I'm coming to this subject? Because Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, which is a very pillar of non-dualistic philosophy, has created so much of misunderstanding, not only among modern Indologists who did not get a chance to study these scriptures under great teachers, but also among Indian teachers like Ramanuja, Madhva, and even Chaitanya. Many others could not really either appreciate or understand the real meaning of this Advaita. So if you Ramanuja, Madhva, many of these teachers have criticized the meaning of Aham Brahmasmi. So we'll come into the subject. Now here I doesn't mean this physical being. Not this 6 feet tall, 250 heavy human being. I means the real I. When I use the word my body, it is obvious that I am different from body, this body. Because I use the my body. Yes, I use this my glass, my paper. It means the paper and myself are different. Like that, I use my body. My mind, there you find I'm different from my mind. Because I'm using the possessive case. As I use my book, I use my mind. I use my intellect. Which means I and intellect, I and mind are two different things. I own my mind. That's why I use the word my mind. So that means the real I should be different from the physical body. and a mind. Otherwise, I won't use this, my body or my mind or my intellect, as I use my book, etc. Now, who is the real I? That's a question. If you yourself ask the question, who am I? The answer could be different depending upon your own spiritual evolution, your education, your culture. If you ask a little child, he won't understand anything other than the little child going to primary school. But as we evolve further, the answer to the question that we ask ourselves, who am I, also evolves. And at the highest level, Vedanta tells you the real I is something that goes beyond body, mind and intellect, that transcends the physical, the mental, the psychological dimensions of a true personality. And that is the real I. That I is the spiritual reality within. So that's the real meaning of I in this particular Mahavakya, using the hermeneutical tool which I mentioned earlier. It's called Lakshanavritti or Lakshana. I'm not going to those aspects which are they are very important from a theological point of view, but we cannot deal with those topics in a lecture which lasts about 50 minutes. So, the real I means something that goes beyond the body, mind and intellect. Now, Brahma has got one meaning. Brahma here, the literal meaning, if you find, is God. G-O-D, God. Capital letter G. There's a difference because in Vedantic terminology, in popular Hindu literature, if you get the word gods and goddesses in plurals, it almost corresponds to what you call angels in the Christian religious tradition. So when you use the word God, capital letter G, it means the monotheistic creator God. So Brahma literally means God. So that doesn't make any sense. I am not God. So what is that God means? The God is the omnipresent, immanent, transcendental, spiritual truth which manifests through the great teachers and founders of world religions and mystics. And when they realize this spiritual truth, they reach the highest level of mystical spiritual perfection, so they became the world teachers. Which means the all-pervading spiritual reality is present in me, in us, in all of us, as the immanent truth. The analogy that is found in many of the technical works is this, it's called, Kutastha Chaitanyam. Kuta means a pot. Stha means is staying within. The space within the pot. So you think of a pot made of clay, and there's a space within the pot. If you like a little child, what is the shape and size of the space within the pot? A small child will tell you that space as the size of the pot and the shape of the pot, which is actually ridiculous. Now that limitation imposed by the size and shape of the pot is impermanent. It is only relative. You break it, what happens to the space that we at first thought to be confined to the pot? What happens? That space, it merges with the space outside. If you got Vedanti language, you call Mahavakyas is the space outside and Ghatakasha is the space within. Now I'm not using those technical things. Now the space that we at first thought was limited to the pot now merges with the space outside of it. When you break that pot, What does it mean? The space was never limited or never confined to the pot. It was a wrong perception. We call it a superimposition in the language of philosophy. Due to this superimposition, we thought that space that is confined to the pot was different from the space outside the pot. To give a much more concrete example, if you suppose you fill a pot with water and immerse it in the ocean or a lake, then also we may think, a fish may think that the water within the pot is different from the water outside of it. But actually, if you break it, the barrier is gone. Like that, when we realize the fact that we have got a spiritual dimension that goes beyond the physical, the psychological, the mental, then we realize that we are actually the same reality as with the transcendental reality. Now, how do we know this? We are coming to that subject now. As I mentioned earlier, a teacher instructs a disciple with the Mahavakya, Tattwamasi, you are that reality. Then the disciple practices meditation, contemplation, introspection, with the help of the other two Mahavakyas, which you already discussed, Ayam Atma Brahma, Prajnanam Brahma, etc. We already discussed. And when the disciple reaches a very high stage of spiritual realization, then he understands, he realizes within the true implication of the Mahavakya Tattwamasi. What is that? I am the Brahman. So it is called the statement related to experience. So is it something that we know? Is it something that we understand, we comprehend, we perceive? It is not. That's a Vedanta. The technical point is there. Well, suppose you forget your name due to some problems, and then after some treatment you come to realize that you recollect your name. You don't get a new name. Actually, this is not a result of getting a new knowledge. We are actually discovering our real nature. So it is not a new knowledge. So Vedanta makes a very important point. It is not the result of knowledge. You read books, all these will help you to remove the misunderstanding that we have got about ourselves. As when we open the doors and windows, when there is light, we understand what is lying on the table. As an example, if there is not enough light in the room, and if it is semi-dark, an object coiled up lying on the table may be perceived to be a snake because you have seen a snake in the zoo or in the forest. And then that day you come back to your home and you find something coiled up on the floor, but because there is not enough light, so you mistake that that rope, which is really a rope, piece of rope, to be a snake. It may be a crack on the floor, it may be a thin stream of water, it may be a stick, curved stick, or it could be a piece of rope. So Vedanta gives these four examples. In ancient texts you find Bhuchidra, Jaladhara, Danda, and Sarpa. 4 examples. These are stock examples which are repeated again and again in hundreds of Vedantic textbooks for the last 3,000 years. So I just mentioned these examples, that's all. But when you open the windows, you switch on the light, then you understand, well, it is not a snake, it is only a rope which is coiled up, which you mistook to be a snake. Now, what was the cause behind this realization of the fact that it was not a snake, but only a piece, but a rope? Not the light. The light did not produce the rope. The light only removed the darkness, which was the cause of your misunderstanding and mistaking that piece of rope to be a snake. The light doesn't reveal the fact that it is rope. The light only removes darkness. And when the darkness of ignorance is removed, the light of knowledge comes in. It is not a cause, but it is a natural result. When ignorance is gone, knowledge is all that is left out. Like that, Vedanta tells you, this realization that we are that all-pervading supreme reality is not a knowledge that you get. When you read a book, you understand what's the distance from here to New York. You get the knowledge from 3,000 miles or something. It is not that kind of a knowledge. It is the self-discovery of our true nature, which we somehow forgot. And that is a very important point. So, that is why you find, if you read Swami Vivekananda's lectures, it was this relentless logic and rational of Vedanta philosophy, non-dualistic philosophy, that conquered Western philosophical mind right from the beginning, from the middle of 18th century up to almost our own times, more or less. Hundreds of doctorate theses are written on this subject all over the world. And in many Christian seminaries in India, which I had the occasion to go to give lectures, there will be dozens of books on Vedanta. So the point is, God's grace, our effort, all these help us to self-discover our true nature. So the example is given in some of the Vedantic texts. It's a famous book, Naiskarma Siddhi is a famous book written by Sureshwaracharya, who is a disciple of Shankaracharya. So he gives an example. Now suppose you are crossing the river, you reach the other bank of the river, you are 10 of you. And then you're looking for somebody, where is the 10th one? So you count, you find only 9, because you don't count yourself. So you count the total number of passengers in the ferry. They were altogether 10, including you. But when you take count of the total number after reaching the other bank of the river, you go on counting only 9. 1, 2, 3, 9. Then finally a total stranger asking, well, how many were you? Total 10. Did you count yourself? No, I didn't count. So Deshamosi in Sanskrit defined. You are the 10th one. Now, the fact, it is not a new knowledge. He actually forgot the fact that he was one of the 10 passengers. So somebody tells him, well, you are the one. You are the 10th one. So it is not a new knowledge. That's why Vedanta says, it is not something that you manufacture. You manufacture golden ornaments from gold. It's called utpadyam. It is not something that you get through refining process. See, if you through oil seeds, you get oil. It is not samskariam. And it is not something that you get through changing its shape. For example, if you put milk then you may get curd the next day if you mix some other buttermilk or something. It is not vicarium. And you go from here to another place, you get a new place. You go to a new place. So from gold you get golden ornaments, something apparently new, but nothing new. It is the same gold which has now taken the shape of a necklace. It is not a new entity. Similarly, Vedanta says, this knowledge, again we have to use the word knowledge because for want of proper vocabulary in modern languages, but in Vedanta it's called aparoksha anubhuti. Anubhuti is called Brahma anubhuti. So this realization of our true nature is not the result of getting a new knowledge, but is only self-discovery of our own true nature. We are returning to our own real nature. It is a homeward pilgrimage. Now, how does this really happen? One may ask this question. And that is a very important topic in Vedanta. How this really happens. Now, there are two fundamental schools in Vedanta which explains how this really happens. Those of you who have read the life of Sri Ramakrishna, many of you must have read. If you have not read, please read. There you find a very interesting incident in Sri Ramakrishna's life. The teacher who taught Sri Ramakrishna this Sadvaita sadhana, Advaita truth he was a great monk. He was a very aged person, Totapuri. He was the abbot of a huge monastery which existed in perhaps West Punjab, which had more than 800 monks in the huge monastery. He was the abbot of the huge monastery. But after reaching spiritual illumination, he was wandering all over Indian subcontinent. Let us say in the middle of 19th century, that is the time. And he himself got this instruction, Tattwamayananda Mahavakyas, and he went to the banks of Narmada, it's a holy river, stayed there, meditated, and after decades of spiritual practices, he realized this truth. Then he started wandering all over India. And he reached Dakshineshwar, where Sri Ramakrishna was living. And he taught Sri Ramakrishna this spiritual path, Advaita sadhana, the practice of Advaita, non-dualism. Now, when the great teacher instructed Sri Ramakrishna, at first there was a difficulty, but the teacher, through a process by instructing him to meditate on the Bhumadhya, those details you find from Sri Ramakrishna's life. The teacher taught Sri Ramakrishna to meditate, and when he received this instruction, immediately Sri Ramakrishna realized this truth. This is what you read in Sri Ramakrishna's life. This is a point you have to remember very clearly. Often we read books, people ask the question, I am Brahman, what does it mean? It doesn't make sense, natural. So Sri Ramakrishna, on the other hand, when he listened to this Mahavakya, Tattwamasi, immediately he had the realization of Aham Brahmasmi, that I am the Brahman. Now you may, after reading this, you find it doesn't happen to you. What to do? No problem. So there are two different schools of thought which explain how this great statement works in the listener's mind, when the disciple's mind, when he listens to the Mahavakya. Depending upon the spiritual fitness of the disciple. Sri Ramakrishna had practiced all sorts of spiritual, had done all sorts of spiritual sadhanas, had done all kinds of spiritual practices right from his infancy. He had thought of only God, And his whole life was a spiritual practice, spiritual sadhana. Spiritual sadhana, spiritual practices. That was what occupied him. That was the only thing he did in his life, right from his early childhood. So Sri Ramakrishna's mind had reached such a high level of the peak of spiritual fitness, spiritual maturity, so that when he listened to the instruction from his teacher, that instruction immediately became an experience to him. Because his mind was already had reached that level of spiritual fitness. It was nothing new, but that particular instruction was coming from the teacher, must have been new. But when he received it, when he listened to it, immediately it became so obvious to him and he entered into deep samadhi. That's what you read in Sri Ramakrishna's life. This particular view is called, this particular phenomenon is called Shabda Aparokshvada in Vedantic tradition, which is the view held by great teachers like Sureshwaracharya, Prakashatmayati, and many other great Vedantic Pandits. Sureshwaracharya was the one who wrote Naishkarma Siddhi, then Brihadaranyaka Bhashyavarthikam, and so on. Now, the point is this. I can give an example. Suppose every day you are driving from Olima to San Francisco and returning every day. Or anyway in San Francisco you are traveling from Bay Area to this place. If somebody tells you, something about the route that you are taking every day, you don't have to think long to understand it, because you're traveling the same route every day. But you did not understand, you did not think of this particular place that this person is mentioning. But once he mentions, immediately it becomes obvious to you. Why? Because you have traveled, you have taken the same route every day. You have become a master in traveling. You can blindfold, you can drive perhaps. Like that, Sri Ramakrishna had reached such a high level of perfection and spiritual maturity and spiritual fitness, so that when he received the instruction from the teacher, it immediately became an obvious fact for him. So that this disciple understands something far beyond the intellectual, logical comprehension or interpretation of the particular Vedic statement, Upanishadic statement. It becomes an experience to him. If you have established in the sadhana chatushtayam, 4 fundamental qualifications in Vedanta, that is Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka, Ihamutra Phalabhoga Viraga, Samadhi Sarka Sambhati, Mumukshuttam. These are the 4 fundamental disciplines, qualifications for every Vedantic aspirant. First, we must know what is real and what is unreal, and we must stick to the real, and then we must have total renunciation for any pleasures or enjoyments in this life or the next. Then we must have complete self-restraint, control, and then we must have a strong desire for spiritual liberation, spiritual illumination. So when you have all these qualifications, and we are established in the highest degree of these qualifications, then one reading is enough to understand the true meaning. You may read the life of St. Augustine. His transformation it happened in no time. Maybe, of course, Augustine was not practicing spiritual sadhana like Sri Ramakrishna. But Augustine, we are not making the statement that Augustine realized this Advaita truth. What I want to say, Augustine must have been thinking, he was a learned person, but not much given to piety and all in the early part of his life. Later, when he came across a biblical statement, something from that statement struck him, and that changed his life. So this happened even among mystics who may, if we go to a library, at a lower level, I'm giving the example of Augustine just as an example for great spiritual seekers who may suddenly get drawn into some spiritual teachings or instructions, even by listening or by reading. If you go to a library and if you find a great holy book, and if you are a real seeker, suddenly you find you have a strict attraction for some great teachings in a holy book. Again, I have to go. You can read the Way of a Pilgrim. The Way of a Pilgrim, you find a pilgrim went to a church where he listened to a sermon where the priest was referring to the first epistle of St. Paul's first epistle to Thessalonians, and then that was the beginning, and there St. Paul had mentioned something about unceasing prayer. So the great pilgrim wanted to learn about it. That was the beginning of his spiritual life, and he went in search of somebody who could teach him the secret of unceasing prayer in the Russian mystical tradition. So fine. The Way of a Pilgrim. So, depending upon our spiritual fitness, we can realize. The Sri Ramakrishna had reached the peak of spiritual fitness. So for him, listening to one Mahavakya instruction was enough, and that became an experience to him. The same thing is said about Shankaracharya. He was a little boy of 7-year-old when he met his teacher, and just one instruction was enough for him to reach the highest experience. You find such examples in India's Vedantic tradition, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Shankaracharya, and many teachers. And in a way, it is true even in education. If you go to university, for example, if you go to school, if a student immediately understands what you teach, you are a school teacher. What does it mean? That student must have read something about what you are teaching now. So his teacher, maybe his parents must have instructed him at home, which enabled the boy to become intellectually mature enough to understand the meaning of what you are now teaching for the first time in that class. So it happened. This is called Shabda Parokshawada. And of course, this is a particular view held by Sureshwara, Prakashatmayadi and others in the Advaitic tradition. And there is another view which is also very important. That is relevant for all common seekers. You get instruction, or you may read, you may listen to these great ideas, and you understand, well, it is something really grand, something we should practice. Anybody belonging to any religious tradition or no religious tradition can actually practice these great spiritual truths, because these Advaitic spiritual truths go far beyond the conventional definitions of organized religions. So, suppose you listen to these great ideas, and then you feel intellectually convinced about the logic of this great teaching. But still it is only an ideal for you, a goal to reach, a great idea. It does not become an experience to you. And so after reading that, after listening to a teacher, you go on, try to understand its meaning more and more. So punar vakyam sravite yatha bhudartha pradipattiye, the Ishkarmi Siddhi Sureshwara says. For others who have not fully established in sadhana chadushtaya, in the fundamental qualifications for Vedantic practice, they have to listen again and again. They have to contemplate on the meaning of these great statements again and again. And also, slowly, they have to evolve themselves to higher levels of spiritual evolution. And as they evolve higher and higher, they will find that these great spiritual instructions have got a practical value, and in course of time, they will understand this truth. So, the point is, it is the highest spiritual teaching, even if it doesn't produce an immediate conviction. Still, if you're convinced of the logic of the teaching, if you try to understand more and more, gradually you find we also evolve. As we practice more and more spiritual sadhanas, we also evolve, and as we evolve, our understanding also evolves. That is true even in academic learning. We may hear something now, but if you're really attracted towards the great teaching, we may try to understand more and more, we may discuss, we may enter into debates with our friends and other students, ask questions to teachers again and again, and gradually in course of time, we may reach higher and higher levels of understanding and realization. That's why these great statements, they constitute a unique spiritual paradigm. They touch upon the mystical dimension of all religious spiritual traditions. So we have to remember, these great Vedantic teachings should not be misinterpreted as something which is relevant only in Hindu tradition or Vedantic tradition alone. In fact, one aspect of Vedanta is, once you understand its universal dimension, it gives us a deep spiritual insight and a foresight that enables us to discover the deeper implications, the hidden gems of the teachings of our own traditions, the traditions that we are born into. That's the uniqueness of these great statements. So thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Rama Krishna Paramastu.